my belief is it's important to hear opposing viewpoints, and it's important to listen and to digest what people are saying. So I would say that is certainly an accepted theme in our senior leadership team. And so we're very open to feedback from people, criticism for that matter, and we can use that to even be better. So an openness to hear that is important. Our board is very deliberate about how they allocate resources because ultimately they are the ones that approve a budget. And our director, Ryan Bowen, works very closely with them to support them through the process of how do we determine our priorities. And our board has consistently said classroom support number one. And so that value really helps to steer those hard decisions when we do have to purchase less money for, say, a technology or an infrastructure program because we want to ensure a certain level of support. So absolutely right. That may look different in a different school district depending on the board.
So a fun episode for me today as I get to interview a longtime colleague from my hometown here in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, where I served for 23 years as a teacher and a district leader. And today's guest, Dustin Swanson, is somebody that I've come to know and respect for quite a while. He's a few years younger than I am, but very quickly in his tenure as a teacher became involved with technology, and that's kind of our first sort of connection. But even as he transitioned into vice principal and principal, and now as superintendent in Prairie South, I've always just appreciated Dustin's thoughtfulness and insights. He's a very deep thinker, and he and I really just have always shared really good conversations. We had a chance even this summer just to meet and have lunch together and just kind of hear his thinking and his experiences. And it was just a no-brainer for me to get somebody from the district that I spent so much time with to have on the show and just hear a little bit about his own personal journey, but also what's happening within Prairie South right here where I live in Moose Jaw. So enjoy my conversation today with Dustin Swanson. You and I spent a lot of years in the same community, in the same school district, and I've been able to kind of watch your progression in your career throughout, your time as a teacher and a vice principal, a principal, and now superintendent in Prairie South. And just when you think about, because I told you before, as much as I live in this community, I don't have a handle on what's happening in Prairie South. So I asked this question with a genuine interest right now. Tell me what you're most proud of in the school division in Prairie South here in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Really, first and foremost is Prairie South has a huge priority on classroom support. And that's something that comes through in many different ways, but it's been a priority for the board and for senior management as well. It's committed to putting as many teachers and supports as possible in place in classrooms. Prairie South has a very low pupil teacher ratio in comparison to other districts. We're very cognizant of taking the greatest portion of our resources to support the learning that happens in classrooms. And that's been a key priority since the day it was formed and still continues. So that's certainly a huge priority and continues to be a focus. We're unique. We're a mix of, we would call rural urban, which would be true for most school districts. We're about the size of Denmark in terms of geography. We cover, about 40 different schools in a wide range from K to 12 to elementary, middle, high schools. We even have some Hunterian colony schools, some associate schools. So we're very diverse. And one thing that I think we're very proud about is that we managed to build a culture where, we all feel we belong, part of that Prairie South organization. And in fact, we were recognized as one of the top 100 employers in Canada by Forbes last year. And I think that's a testament to the work that's happened for decades to build a really, high functioning educational institution for our students and for our staff.
So I was part of that first 5 years of that transition from this amalgamation. I mean, those early days were just, all right, getting to know sort of the lay of the land, where all the stuff is. And I remember driving south to the border to Bengoff and Coronach, and then up to Craik and all that and everything in between. And I remember, this is, again, for what it's worth, my recollection was there was, at least from as those of us who were sort of part of the urban, and again, I say urban, thinking about my friends in Vancouver and Toronto who would chuckle at that, but it's relative speaking, it's urban. There was a sense, at least, of, I feel like it was gratitude, and just like those rural school divisions at the time really didn't have very much support at all for many years. And so this was and again, we were always careful not to be like, we're not the saviors, we're not coming in to save you, but yeah, we're trying to build that, but still sort of, navigating what that relationship was and trying to figure out, like, even things like coming together was always a challenge, just because people have to drive 2 hours or more to get there. How would you describe, I guess, the evolution of those relationships? You kind of touched on it a bit, but I just love to know any more sort of specifics and ways in which you kind of created that sense of community across this very large geographical area.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Dean. And I'll just qualify by saying I've only been a superintendent now for 4 years. So, the way in which I view how that came about is kind of influenced more immediately with the work that's being done. However, over the past, nearly 20 years, some of the huge benefits have been that we've been able to take expertise and particularly talented people in certain areas, and they're able to share that more widely with their colleagues. That's probably the biggest gain. Is no longer are you an isolated group of 3 or 4 schools and 100 staff. You're actually now 1,200 staff and 7,000 students and that many more support people. So there's just more connection possible, right? So the great ideas spread more readily because there's more access to it. That's a big one. So lots more support available that way. We've become better at providing one-to-one support for staff and support in schools. So, for example, if you needed access to someone from a learning team or a consultant, they're prepared and willing and able, whether it's a Zoom call, a Teams call, or they'll drive right away to be able to serve the need and to be able to help, right? And so that's been a value that's part of the organization from the learning superintendent, that this is a priority. We've got to get supports and PD and training in place. And so that's been a big shift. Lots of things are done and have been done and continue to be done that are very collaborative in nature. So if I'll give you an easy example, we're a school district that builds a school calendar that actually gets input from schools. So we have parents, we have administrators, we have teachers that form a subcommittee that helps to develop the calendar each year. And that's a very diverse mix of people from across our school division. And I think that's a small example, but that's the sort of work that gets done regularly. And I think helps to build that sense of collaboration amongst us all. We all feel that we're part of Team Prairie South, regardless of where you work. And it's done in, small ways, big ways, but that's been my experience all the way through. I do know, speaking more recently, that although it's expensive, the opportunity to have everyone come together is very important. So we've sort of committed as a senior leadership team that every 3 to 4 years, we are bringing all our employees together so that we can learn together, we can connect, and that, we can ensure a rich message is shared about, what it is we're trying to accomplish and make sure that everyone's aligned to our organizational goals. So we'll actually do that again. We did it 3 years ago. We're doing it again this August. We'll have all of our employees together and we'll gather for a full day. And we've had tremendous feedback about the impact that's had and the opportunity for people to connect, which is really hard to do when you have some geography involved, but absolutely worth the effort.
And again, I can just speak to the fact that in those 5 years where you were trying to build trust with people that didn't know you, they didn't, again, that's just difficult to do. And again, as much as the technology can help, that technology is sort of I always view that don't use that as your starting point. That's your supplement to keep those relationships going. Mm-hmm. But, you mentioned just being able to get it when people needed support, you were just there. I mean, just the speed at which you provide support always says something, right? Like how quickly you can say to something, yes, I got this, we'll figure something out, whatever that looks like. But again, also that time together. So, and you and I were all part of sort of that, a bit of that IT community within Prairie South, and you got to know people but that was, again, a small community, a small subset of the larger organization. So it's great to hear that there's a commitment to that kind of coming together, right? Because there's always this idea that, this is what, video technology, even in the last 15 years has gotten a lot better. But at the same time, it just does not replace, sitting in a room together. And again, we say it a lot, and I think of it so much in the age of AI, is the humanity of people talking about their kids or their hobbies or whatever other thing that has nothing to do with the actual work you're doing. But that foundation of trust and connection is like that just so hard to be understated. So good on you to kind of keep that momentum going. And I guess I know there's other smaller pockets of communities cross school committees and departments and so forth that connect. So yeah, that's so good to hear. I wonder about, though, I'm going to ask you this question. And again, you can look back to your time in any kind of your leadership role over your years. And it sounds like you entered this new role post-COVID to some degree, but obviously there were lingering impacts of that, as there has been for a while. But when you think about your years as a leader, and I've always admired your leadership skills in whatever role that's been, what do you kind of look back as saying, that was a challenge that I keep in mind as I, and utilize the lessons learned from a particular challenge that have kind of stayed with you for a while, or maybe more short term, however you want to respond?
Okay. My mind immediately goes to the reality of just balancing priorities, understanding, like, there's obviously in our sector, there's tremendous demands on everyone, whether those are immediate demands from where you work or from your colleagues, or could be the province or the state, or there's so many, and maybe post-COVID too, there's even more invested interest in the sector. So trying to navigate what are 75 priorities, which we can't achieve, like having the ability to narrow down to what are the 3 or 4 or 5, quote, big rocks that you really have to drive and work towards. I think that's probably the biggest leadership challenge and thing I had to come into understanding and learning with in order to actually make a difference. For example, if I'm working in a school where the staff don't feel safe or don't feel connected to each other, then we're not going to probably make much progress in terms of changing educational outcomes, because we've got to go back and build that trust, and we need to work together and build that kind of community first. I think recognizing those things and being able to balance all the priorities and to bear that down to 2 or 3, 4 key things that we want to work on in order to make a difference, I'd say would be probably the biggest thing, because otherwise it's easy to feel a little bit overwhelmed or get distracted by other initiatives where, we need to keep focused on really what is our core work. And that's something, now working in senior leadership, you understand that becomes even more critical at this time, because there's even more demands on your time or your expertise or influences that come into play. And so having a firm understanding of your strategic vision is super, super important.
I just want to build on that, because I also think too, one of the challenges that leaders face, and kind of along the same lines, is that, I mean, you're working with limited budget. And so as you make a decision, for example, you talked about at the beginning, you're proud of Prairie South's attention to classroom support. That means if you're investing in that, probably means that there's other areas of the organization that are getting less funding than a neighboring district, because you've chosen that as a priority. And anytime, I mean, you would have had this experience as a principal and vice principal at a school level. Anytime you make a decision, difficult decision, that we're going to do this, already there are sometimes a smaller, sometimes a larger group of people who say, I don't like that. That's not how I would have done things. So I wonder about, and I've always sort of seen you as being somebody who's a, pretty good communicator and self-aware to realize that there's another side of this. So I just even think about just whether you could think of something specific or even generally, how you ensure that when those decisions are made and when you focus on a priority and recognizing I don't even want to call them naysayers, but just people who say, yeah, I don't agree with that decision. Like, how do you ensure that as an organization, those people aren't just pushed aside and ignored, but are helped in some way to understand the decisions or feel part of it, to still feel that sense of community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we've known each other for years, so you recognize my my belief is it's important to hear opposing viewpoints, and it's important to listen and to digest what people are saying. So I would say that is certainly an accepted theme in our senior leadership team. And so we're very open to feedback from people, criticism for that matter, and we can use that to even be better. So an openness to hear that is important. Our board is very deliberate about, how they allocate resources, because ultimately they are the ones that approve a budget. And our director, Ryan Bowen, works very closely with them to support them through the process of how do we determine our priorities. And our board has consistently said classroom support number one. And so that value really helps to steer those hard decisions when we do have to purchase less money for, say, a technology or an infrastructure program because we want to ensure a certain level of support. So absolutely right. That may look different in a different school district depending on the board who ultimately will approve a budget. I think that, having a great working relationship with your colleagues, with your board, with your coworkers is super key to being able to understand all those dynamics and to be able to keep those voices in your mind when you have to make decisions about where resources go. And we live in an era where funding for education is not necessarily stable, right? It's a budgetary process done provincially every year. You will see this pattern in terms of funding. So you do have to make adjustments and be prepared for that. Again, I think it's just key work with the board who ultimately oversees the entire budget, but ensuring that, we're reflecting the values of our schools, our staff, our communities, our students in the decisions we make that's just part of our work, or has to be part of our work.
And, again, that idea that there's always hard decisions to make, and there's just one pie, and how you divide that pie. Of course, we can all have differing opinions about what takes priority, but I think having a strong, clear value of what is our priority. I think, to be honest with you, like a lot of the school districts I work with, I don't know that the priority is always as clear. Like because you can say things like, "Oh, we believe in equity." Sure, what does that mean? Like you have narrowed it down to actually something that's very tangible and specific.
Yeah.
And so people over time will recognize, oh, we don't spend as much money in this area because we allocated resources here because that's our value.
Yes.
And there's people who may not even necessarily ascribe to that value, but this is who we are, right? Kind of thing. So
we've said for the last 4 years, like this is work that sort of started when I first came into the role, but we've really focused on being an organization where staff and students want to work and learn. They don't have a choice to attend our schools, but if they did have a choice, we would want them to choose us. And we want to excel at our core business, which is learning and well-being. And that's it. And that's our mantra that we talk about continually with staff. And, that's a big part of it. That's what we're trying to do, be the best educational sector supplier, if you will, that is even possible in our area.
Yeah, 100%. So I don't know what the status of things are in Prairie South as far as, leadership retention and those things. I can tell you across Canada and the US too, it's tough, right? It's difficult finding people who want to take on that role. And you look back in your career 20 years ago when you decided, and maybe that was always part of your plan, or maybe that was an emerging thing, whatever. But first of all, I would love to know sort of what your perspectives are on the sort of state of leadership, because as much as you look like you're still in your first 10 years, I know you're not a million miles away from wrapping this up, but I guess I'm thinking about two things. Like number one, the state of leadership today, but also what advice you would give if you do identify a young teacher who you think she or he would be fantastic in a leadership role, kind of the advice you give to them. So I guess two-part question.
Okay. So the state of educational leadership, I would concur with what you stated. There's certainly less interest in leadership. There's probably less interest in even teaching positions overall. Like staffing is a more challenging process than I'm sure it was 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. So that's a big issue. And you can look at any conference or article and see lots of jurisdictions are looking at how they're going to solve that challenge in their districts. We feel that as well. So that also applies to leadership. In our context, as a principal, you're still a member of the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation. So it's a unique kind of relationship. It's not that way across Canada or of course in the US. And that is a unique thing that I think actually helps us recruit more leaders in Saskatchewan, because they are still working with and alongside their colleagues, although they take a slightly, different position as in a formal leadership way. So that's a good thing. But yes, it's a challenge, and it's something that, we're going to continue to have to work through. In terms of how do you encourage or advice for someone who may be thinking about it, it, it for me, the decision to stick my neck out, so to speak, and jump into the leadership arena felt natural, and it's become a really fulfilling career for me. So I have absolutely zero regrets on the decisions I've made. There are many people who I think have the skills, and I at times think that the fear of conflict is actually one of the biggest barriers that prevents them from wanting to, have to be in a position to make a decision or to upset someone or upset their colleague. And so I think, to me, that's one of the bigger barriers, is to how can you work through understanding that conflict is inevitable. You think, as a person, is there conflict in your house? Of course there is, with, whether it's your partner or with kids. It's an understood part of that, just like working with kids. And so conflict is going to bring itself in different forms when you work into leadership, but it can be a huge barrier for people. And having the confidence, the faith that you can work through some challenges you'll face, to think of yourself as like an educational entrepreneur, that, you're going to take some risks, you're going to do some great things, you're going to make some mistakes, and that is okay. That is part of the process. Trying to find to be uncomfortable is going to be a pretty normal part of the process. But as a leader, and maybe people don't know this before they become a vice principal or principal, is that there's a massive support network of other people just like you that reach out to each other. And it's an entire support mechanism. Just like when you work in a school, all of your colleagues are a support mechanism. So you're never really working alone. You're never really in isolation to make hard decisions. It's a very collaborative industry, and it can be incredibly fulfilling when you get to have an impact on the decisions that affect your students, your staff, your community. And I think that's where the real power is, that you really get to have a meaningful impact at a much bigger level when you formally become a school leader.
Well, that's excellent advice. I really, sort of the two things that you kind of shared. One is like just understanding that conflict is, yep, that's part of it. You will not be a leader without engaging in conflict. And then again, there's a myriad of ways to understand that and deal with that. And, I think part of it is like, and my mind goes to sort of the work I do with AI, is that's part of the humanity of it. Like AI is always intended to be perfect. Everything comes out, like, gives you the answers you want or whatever. There's not that dissonance. And human relationships, that's part of I guess the joy of it, is that it's not always perfect, and you have to navigate that, and you have to understand how you help different people who might see things differently than you. And so building up all those skill sets to say, oh, this person requires me to do this. This person needs me in a different way. And I mean, that's what a good coach, a good leader does, is recognizes you have to think about the people that you're serving and how they might have different needs and respond to that and embrace that. As that's how I become a better human, is developing all of those different skills that, and again, might not be perfect, but
no. And this is the key thing, is that you're actually probably never really ready for whatever next position you take. Just like when you run a marathon, if you've ever, you prepare for it, but you're never really fully trained to do the event. You just get as much information and train as you can, and you go and do it. And in leadership, you probably will never feel really ready for what's coming next. And that's part of it, is, the Gretzky quote I actually have on my wall is, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And it's been on my wall for 20 years for a reason, but that's very true. Like, you've got to be uncomfortable and put yourself out there and take a risk, and you're not going to feel great about it, but that's where the real learning happens. Stretching yourself outside that comfort zone is where that's the magic. That's where it all happens.
And while I appreciate the marathon reference, I cannot relate at all to that, but I could relate to parenting, right? Parenting is probably another good one, right? Like,
yes,
you are not ready when that kid comes up,
nope.
shows up, is, oh, I read a bunch of books, but they're kind of helpful, but not really. Cause now and being a teacher, right? Those first few years of being a teacher, all the training you had, it's not that it wasn't helpful. It's just, but now it's real. And now you have to make decisions, a million of them a day that, you didn't have all the training you needed
So
for,
true.
but here you are. But the second point that I wanted to kind of think about more, and this is where I would say, I know it's not always the same. So this idea that as principals, you're not alone kind of thing. It's interesting because I was talking to a superintendent in Alberta a few months ago, and they do a ton of stuff in well-being. And he was surprised that his principal group was identified as the most lonely group of all of the people. And so I think, again, this can speak to maybe the culture that have been part of, that maybe, and again, there's lots perhaps reasons why, but I think whether that's true or not, I think having a community of people as a leader that you could say, hey, here's a new one. What do I do now? Kind of thing, right? And not feeling alone. But then I wonder too, if this idea of principals as being part of the union in Saskatchewan may help that a bit, right? Because I know, in my experience in Saskatchewan, there were principals who, would talk to me, not about confidential things, but talk about challenges that they're facing. And they saw me, in many cases as a colleague, even though I
Yes.
wasn't a principal at the time, that wasn't my role. But so, yeah, I don't know about that, but I know, again, I think probably in your experience, being in the city with a high school with, 3 other high schools that you were kind of associated with, there was probably a lot of interaction, even amongst those 3 schools, never mind the larger district. Yeah.
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 Yeah. No,
Go ahead.
it's part of it is, as a district being deliberate about creating those connections, like we, in our situation, we have our administrators come together at least 5 times a year, maybe 6, sometimes for 2 days. And a lot of the work that we do together is deliberately collaborative. Like we create cluster groups that are mixes of our various administrators from across the diverse perspectives of our school division. And we do that deliberately, and we do it always together as a team. And, that's work we've been doing for 4 years solid. And we get really positive feedback from that approach. It's very simple, but it's been impactful, and it's helped create new relationships between our administrators across our geography.
Yeah. No, again, those structures have to be in place. So the last question I want to ask you, and then we'll kind of come to the sort of home stretch here.
Sure.
As you talked about this idea of being part of a community and connection, I don't know if that's where this will take you, or maybe you have another response, but I'm always interested in and a little bit of gratitude from your perspective. When you think about a person in education, and bonus points if you can name somebody who might actually hear this, get a little shout out. And again, some people say, I hate this question because there's so many people. Yeah, I get it. There's a lot of people you could think, and most people can't name, but I'm asking you today to name one.
To name one. Okay. Can I break that rule already and name a couple?
All right.
Sorry. You can edit this down, right? You can make it.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Rule breakers are always part of the package too.
I'll package them. 2 teachers taught me, Lyle Johnson and Allison Litt. They taught me when I was a kid myself, right? And they inspired me to be a teacher because they showed it's possible to put yourself in an uncomfortable position and to achieve beyond what you think is possible. And that, feeling of hope had a massive impact on me. It probably influenced me to start my career. In terms of coworkers and colleagues, in terms of the educational journey, certainly actually, Dean, you're a part of that as well. I remember us having many deep conversations along with Sandy Kitts when we would talk about, I think we had a name, I can't remember, the revolution or the leadership revolution. There's a little cluster of us going way back 20 years ago where we stretched our thinking around aspects of education, and that innovative type thinking has always attracted me, but I hope it's kind of carried me and kept, at the forefront. So that's a little piece. And in terms of leadership skills, there's a fellow, he's a wonderful man and principal. His name is Scott Williamson. And unfortunately, his life was cut short, but he had a tremendous impact on me in terms of how to work with people, and that people are first and foremost above everything that we do. And he modeled and lived that value, and that forever spoke to me. And so I would say there's not just one, but that gives you a little package of some of the people that had a big influence on my thinking, my leadership style, and why I even entered education. I always dreamed I wanted to be working in movies, not in front of the camera, but helping to make movies and build movies and all those things. And so I'm sure glad that the path took the route that it has, though.
I appreciate that response just because I know all those people. So that makes it kind of, and again, Scott was a wonderful leader, man. Every day, I'm just glad you mentioned him because I haven't thought about Scott for a long time and thinking about the way he handled himself.
Mm.
So just always with pure class. The guy had just a calmness about him. Like it just seemed like this is a guy that does not get rattled. And I'm sure internally, like everybody else, that doesn't always feel that way. But he projected that sense of it's going to be okay. And what a powerful legacy he's left. A question about both Allison and Lyle. So were you ever there? Did they ever serve in the same school after you became principal?
Allison was a little bit. Yes. Alice and I worked together a bit when I was vice
Okay.
principal at Central. So we overlapped quite a bit.
Yeah.
Never with Lyle.
That's kind of a neat transition when these were the people that were your teachers and now all of a sudden you're in a leadership position with them. So that's kind of a neat full circle.
Yeah.
All right. Those are wonderful. And you won't lose any points for breaking the rules because I enjoyed that little reminiscence just because, again, from a personal perspective, like that's very meaningful. All right. Kind of home stretch here. 3 quick ones to kind of to get you on your way here. Professionally, what are you reading and or listening to or consuming these days?
Okay. Professionally, I commit to reading like a book a month. Is sort of what I like to do. Although I must admit, a lot of times it's audible because I do drive quite a bit with work. True Reconciliation by, I got to think of her name. She was Jody Wilson-Raybould. She was a politician in BC
That's
and
right.
anyways, Attorney General actually in Canada. She has a great book about true reconciliation. So I'm just in the midst of that at this point. Fantastic. I am also a huge fan of something. It's nothing to do with education, but it's Ryan Holiday's books on Stoicism. He's got a whole series. I love listening to Ryan Holiday's. He has many great leadership stories and examples. Listening to his new book, and that's a part of that. And anything Daniel Pink. I'm actually gonna do like this. I think this is the most important leadership book that anyone can read, and it's old, but it is a gem in terms of understanding what motivates people. When you step into leadership, you're working with adults more than you are students, and that pivot and shift. This book forever, kind of changed my thinking around, how do you support and help adults. So professionally, that's where my work is. Different podcasts too, but those are the big ones.
Sure, that's great. And again, for those people that are listening only, that was Drive by Daniel Pink. So familiar with some people, but again, I appreciate the recommendation again. All right, now this is more for just, listen, you're chilling, you're trying to take and I know you're pretty active, you're biking, you're doing all kinds of other things outside,
Yes.
but let's say you just want to sit down and you're just chilling. What you got anything on a binge list that maybe it's coming up here in the next little while or something you kind of consume over a while?
I think like most people, I've probably moved over to YouTube for most of my streaming or options, but I'm a big fan of do-it-yourself type things. So
Yeah.
not surprise you, Dean, knowing me. I'm really into Sam, the cooking guy, and I like to do some grilling and some, I enjoy following the rabbit hole of how to, last week I fixed my air conditioner. I used videos to figure out what was wrong and fixed it for $20. That's a big part of that. But in terms of just just distraction, I actually like to go to the oldies. So Modern Family, probably find me watching Ted Lasso again, waiting for the new season, and certainly like binging on Seinfeld still 30 years later. It's just too great to not.
It's comfort, right? Like those are just comfort things.
Totally.
It's just like a bowl of chili on a cold day. It's it just hits the spot. It's nothing fancy, but it kind of gets it. No, I'm with you on that one. And I like I always ask people kind of when you use the term rabbit holes. Oh, what is a new thing that's sort of squeezed into your algorithm? Like for a while, I mean, I have terrible high level number of like barbecue / steak related videos.
Yes.
Like just a guy cutting a prime rib.
Yeah.
It's so stupid, but I can't believe how much I'm just like, that looks good.
Yes, I understand.
And then the other weird algorithm, and maybe if this triggers something for you, let me know, is car cleaning. Like guys that like detailing of a vehicle, like just, and by the way, I didn't even ask you, what's this? Is there any VWs in your life right now?
I just sold my last project, which is a 1974 Westphalia pop-top camper van, bright orange, and saved it, rescued it, and it actually has moved to Brantford, Ontario. So it's taken quite a journey, but there'll be something else soon, I'm sure.
Okay. Yeah. My wife still has dreams she's looking at the new VW vans as being like, that's her goal. But anyway, so it's amazing how those algorithms sort of lead you into different things as you get going with that. All right. Last question. And this, I'm going to be very curious to see how you answer this one.
Okay.
Both as residents of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, what are some of the lesser known places that you'd ask people to check out? So you can't say tunnels, you can't say the spa, but somebody that's coming to Moose Jaw saying, hey, we're coming for a couple days. Where should we eat? Where should we go? What should we do here? And again, it could be surrounding areas. It doesn't have to be right in the city here.
Okay. So, I mean, it's difficult because these are well known, but you can't miss. So like the burger cabin reopened this year, right? So
Yep.
the burger cabin in Waccamaw, and the sitting area in behind. In fact, I was there last night, and it's shaded and beautiful by the river. So Waccamaw Valley, there's some wonderful hiking, some nature areas. It's a very historic area, but the burger cabin still has great food. So I'd say that would be my first recommendation. Maple Leaf Bakery on South Hill in Moose Jaw still has the greatest old-fashioned donuts, arguably anywhere. And, they only open at 9 a.m. every day. And in the tourist season, you want to be lined up outside at 9 a.m. if you really want to have the good picks. So I would say certainly that's a great option. And if you want something totally different, the Honey Pot Distillery, which is west of Moose Jaw on Caribou Street, it's actually out like in a farmer's field.
Right.
Has excellent food, regardless whether, you like the drinks they have, but the food is really very wonderful. And it's just a great little vibe out there.
And I didn't even know about this. So you're the second person that's mentioned this. So now that's going to be on it'd be probably a really good summer vibe too, because I'm sure there's like some outdoor.
There is. Yeah. There's a games area. Yeah. It's a great thing. Make sure you make reservations though. Because
was that right? Okay.
Full. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Listen, I learned something today. I love that. But again, love the other two shout outs. They're awesome. Burger.
And have you eaten at Trigo in La Flèche before?
No.
Okay. So that is also must see do. Now, La Flèche is like over an hour drive, but 100% worth the trip. They do the same menu. It's rotating based on a country, but he's like a 4-star chef and everything is made from scratch, themed around the country that they're working on. Like right now they're doing Georgian food. However, every 3 or 4 months they have a new menu. 100% must go.
Okay. All right, Dustin, listen, as much as all the other stuff you've said was great, I got 2 little tidbits for my own community. This is fantastic. Listen, Dustin, I appreciate you taking the time today. I know a little bit more relaxed in the summer when there aren't quite as many urgencies, but I also know you got a new school that you're trying to get open here in a month or so, and you're going to take a little time to spend with family and a little recuperating. So again, thanks so much, Dustin, for the time. Again, always appreciate you as a leader and as a human. And so thanks for our time today.
Thank you, Dean, for the invitation and for the time as well.